Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Swiftly Spoken, a fan-made Taylor Swift podcast in which we analyse her artistry, including her lyricism, music videos, and full album retrospectives. And for the first time today, we shall be doing exactly that. We are your hosts, Lisa and Cameron, and we hope you join us as we travel back in time to just over a year ago to remember, relive, and review the short-lived Evermore album and era. So for this very first album retrospective, we're going to be going over all of the intricate details of Taylor's 9th studio album, Evermore. We're going to be discussing its creations, its standout themes, lyrical moments that we love, and the legacy, which is quite relevant right now following its recent Album of the Year nomination. Above all, we're going to be deep diving into the Evermore album and pulling it all apart to answer if it was actually somehow overlooked. Of course, we'll also be giving our own personal appraisals and opinions of the album throughout.
Okay, so Evermore was released only 5 months after Folklore on the 11th of December 2020 as a way for Taylor to celebrate turning 31. It was Taylor's second surprise album drop in 2020, and its rollout and release kind of mimicked that of Folklore with the kind of Instagram announcement and with the layout of the album across multiple different pictures on Taylor's feed, and then also having a lead single music video release and a YouTube premiere, and then a deluxe edition dropping after, and the CD including special deluxe edition songs. Upon its release, it was branded as Folklore's sister album.
In relation to this, Taylor basically described Evermore as not being able to stop writing songs with her collaborators. She said that we were standing on the edge of the Folklorian woods and had a choice to turn and go back or to travel further into the forest of this music. And they chose to wander deeper in. So usually Taylor described that she tends to look at albums as one-off eras that once they're done, she kind of discards and moves on to the next thing. But in the case of Folklore, she really felt like it was something different. She wanted to continue collaborating with Aaron, with Jack, and with new collaborators, as we'll discuss. But she made the Folklore era into something more in creating the second sister album. So what are your thoughts on Evermore being a sister album to Folklore and Taylor for the first time ever creating this kind of side A, side B era couple of albums?
No, I really like this. I love the way that Taylor describes it as like having the decision to jump off of a cliff and go into the next era, but deciding to turn around and just explore that one more and delve even deeper into it. And I think it's really like, it's an amazing metaphor anyway, but I just love that she chose to do that for the first time, and rather than disregard the previous album, because a lot of the times when she finishes albums, she sometimes has, because she has to move on from them and like rebirth herself in a totally new way, she just almost like, I don't know, looks back almost negatively on that album and is like, oh no, I don't like that album. Or like in Miss Americana when she said, I'm going to create a better album than Reputation. And I think that it's really nice that she appreciated that album even once she'd finished it and was like, no, I don't want to discard that and make out like I need to make something better. I want to continue on that. And I really, really love that she did that, and that Folklore kind of evolved into something else that is totally different. Like I personally, Evermore and Folklore, you can tell that they're different albums, but I love that they are kind of still linked, and I think a sister is a really kind of perfect way to describe them. They're kind of just as mature and just kind of, and you can see the similarities, but just like sisters or siblings, they're totally different, and I really, really love that kind of imagery. And it's interesting because obviously before we found out the name of the Lover album, there was this whole theory of the Me and You and being like a two-parted album. Upon Me's release, everyone was like, oh, there's going to be 2 parts with the blue and the pink. And it's interesting that technically now we have something very similar. So yeah, what are your kind of thoughts on it all?
Yeah, so it was definitely something that was discussed during the pre-Lover era, as you said, and something that was in a lot of people's minds, especially when she mentioned having written so many songs, especially in the Lover era. And this time around, obviously Lover was just one standalone album in the end, but this time around I think it made much more sense. And just as you said, the metaphor of them being sisters is absolutely brilliant, because though they have their similarities and they're kind of from the same lineage, if you will, Folklore is, well, we'll get into the differences as we go along, but Folklore is one thing and Evermore is a different thing, and it does stand on its own, and it's so much more experimental, and I feel like there's much less limitations to Evermore than there was for Folklore. Not that there were many anyway,
Yeah, they literally like deep dived into that forest, ripped it apart, and were like, let's kind of create something totally different from something similar.
Exactly, and that's something that Aaron mentioned on Instagram when Evermore was released. He commented how the songs were so much wilder and freer, and it's a continuation of what they started, but with like darker hues and strange time signatures. So it was so much more experimental and so much more of an exploration into the sound that they had established.
Okay, so the tracks on Evermore were all produced by Aaron with Taylor and one with his twin brother Bryce, except for Gold Rush, which was produced by Jack. And what are your opinions on Gold Rush?
So Gold Rush is quite a standout track because it is the only track, as you said, produced by Jack, which does kind of make it different to the rest of the album, though it still fits in there quite nicely. And Jack absolutely adores this song. He said he made it kind of like an ode to the August Heads, which are like the fans of the song August from Folklore. About its production, Jack was very excited because he was able to get a few of the band members from Bleachers involved. So it really is a collaborative effort on that song and on this album in general. Gold Rush is a really, really lovely song. Taylor describes it as something like this whole daydream that takes really as a second, but is described in this like 3 or 4 minute song.
Yeah, no, I love that Jack kind of created this song for fans of August, and I think that it is kind of like Evermore's August, and I really do love that description of it, and I really love Gold Rush. I think it's such a really cool song that it's just the production behind it is amazing, and the way that Taylor sings, it's probably one of my standouts from Evermore. I normally love kind of every song that Jack produces with Taylor. I think the pair of them have just throughout Taylor's career have just created some incredible songs, and they just are like the perfect kind of collaborators.
For sure, yeah. Taylor and Jack make such good music together, and this song, as you said, big standout, and the message that it conveys, like how she's able to describe this fleeting 1 second feeling in such an amazing way, like daydreaming about this true love. And it kind of is similar to other songs like Mine or
Yes.
where it
I've never
describes
thought
this,
about that before. I love that.
yeah,
Comparison.
it describes this whole love affair that hasn't even happened yet, and I love that.
Yeah, no, that is such a cool comparison. Yeah, with Mine, of just like looking at someone and seeing kind of your whole life with them for like just, and it's like it's almost like a kind of supercut of your life with them, just and then it's like over. But the way that she
Snapping back
describes
to
it is,
reality.
yeah, I love that. I absolutely love. Yeah, and it is. It's like the Mine, kind of like the Mine music video where she just looks at him in the cafe, and then their whole life,
Exactly, yeah. And I've always kind of placed Gold Rush in my head to be located in a cafe as well, because she's like, then it fades into the grey of my day old tea, and it's all very like she's brought back to life and she's brought back to reality, and she's just sitting there, you know.
I love that. I absolutely love that description. Yeah, that's really made me appreciate Gold Rush even more than I already did.
And also to explain what a gold rush is, it's basically a thing, gold mainly, that's where the saying comes from, but in this case, it's a person that everyone wants. It's someone who's really sought after, and Taylor really doesn't like to or doesn't want to be competing against all these people for their affection. But at the same time, it's very enticing to maybe be able to be the person who gets their attention and is able to stay with them and be their partner eventually.
Yeah, no, I do really love that imagery as well. It's kind of calls back to kind of Western America, where everyone desperately wanted to try and find gold, so everyone flocked to kind of gold areas to try and buy up, to like mine for gold, find gold, and then sell it. And it's that kind of the enticing feeling of like, oh, I want to see what's kind of going on there, but I don't really like the competing. But then the thrill is that you might be the one to find the gold, and in this case, you might be the one to actually date this person or have a life with them.
So, are there any standout lyrics from Gold Rush you absolutely adore?
One of my favourites is probably eyes like sinking ships on waters so inviting I almost jump in. I just love that kind of, the way that she sings it has this kind of watery feel, and the idea that it's just like, I want to jump into the water, but it's like dangerous.
So dangerous.
The ships are sinking, but there's something so inviting about it. I really, really love that description. What's your kind of favourite lyric?
I have two that I absolutely love, which are really different, but one is, I don't like that falling feels like flying until the bone crush.
Yes.
And the second one being with my Eagles t-shirt hanging from your door, because I feel like it's such a It reminds me of The Scarf in All Too Well. It's such a Taylor lyric, this tiny little detail that she brings light on, and it really makes the whole song so much realer.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, that bone crush lyric, yeah, the idea of like you're falling for someone and then, you know, you're kind of let down and disappointed, and only then is the falling then painful rather than kind of romantic. Okay, so next we'll discuss why some people think that Evermore is often overlooked, and most of the time this is due to its similarity to folklore, and some people feel like it was only a way to promote folklore and enhance on folklore and highlight folklore's amazing songwriting, and the kind of Christmas release of it as well meant that it was almost just a kind of continuation of folklore basically, and was just a 2.0. But I think I can probably speak for Lisa as well here that both of us agree that it does stand out as its own body of work, and it is not folklore 2.0. It's definitely a kind of a separate piece of work that is similar and enhances off of folklore but stands on its own, if you know what I mean. How do you feel about these controversies and this comparison to folklore, and why lots of people either not look negatively on it but sometimes overlook Evermore?
Yeah, I feel like it is sometimes overlooked as being folklore 2.0 or the other folklore when it does really, like you said, I do completely agree. It has its differences, and it's like we have discussed, it's so much more experimental. For me, it's so much freer as well. It feels like music that was somehow made after folklore and kind of as a passion project, maybe not even to be released one day, and then we got it. So I think we're very lucky to have Evermore, and it does have its own standout differences for sure.
Yeah, I think that folklore kind of allowed Taylor to explore, and then once she explored, it just like opened the floodgates, and Evermore is kind of that of like, suddenly she was like, wow, I can do so much stuff. I can do, you know, I can write these endless songs with the kind of different production, you know. I just think it really did, folklore kind of opened the floodgates that allowed Evermore to happen.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of what Taylor was suggesting with the idea of the forest, of like, actually, I want to go back in that forest because there's loads of things I haven't explored yet that now I've been allowed to explore because of folklore.
Moving on to the chronology or the order in which these songs were written, we do have quite a few details about how they were produced and written, mostly given by Aaron. The first song that really we can assume was written and recorded was Dorothea, July 2020, as can be seen by Aaron's Instagram post, where he posted a picture of a draft of all of these songs that he had made with his band Big Red Machine, which was supposedly for one of his future albums with them. Closure is also mentioned as being part of Big Red Machine's eventual album. So both of these were very, very early on tracks that were then eventually put on Evermore. I think that out of the two, Closure is definitely the more experimental of the two, and can be seen that it was definitely made for music that is more similar to Big Red Machine than to Taylor's typical sound, especially as Aaron describes it had a very, very strange time signature. So how do you feel about Closure?
Initially, upon first listen back last year, I was very confused by the sound. I don't listen to a lot of kind of experimental music. So to me, I was like, wait, this sounds really odd. I was just like, especially with the rest of Evermore that had this kind of like very kind of ethereal kind of sound to it, that it was like, whoa, what's this kind of like computer crash noise? But now, with a kind of years kind of listen, I have actually really grown to love Closure, and have grown to love the kind of awkwardness of the production and the kind of experimental nature of it. And I do really, really like Closure, but I would really be intrigued to hear Closure with just the piano. So if Taylor ever did do a live or ever did do some kind of performance of Evermore, I would really, really like to hear Closure with just the piano, because I think that it would add kind of, I think as much as I do love the production, I think it does take away from the intensity of the lyrics, because sometimes you're like, whoa, it's kind of like they clash.
It's very busy, yeah. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, so I think that, I think it would be really, I think I would appreciate the song a lot more, even though I do really appreciate it anyway, if I could hear it just once with just kind of a piano and kind of a more softer backing to it. What about you? How do you feel about Closure? Because I do know that it divides the fandom a lot, I think, this song.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opinions about Closure. I do enjoy it. I love the lyrics for sure. And the production, it does take some getting used to. But once you do get used to it, I kind of feel like it's very poignant in that song in particular, because the way that Taylor, well, the lyrics describe someone is trying to get closure on a situation that involved her. And she doesn't want that closure. She doesn't want to be involved in any of that. And one of the lyrics that kind of remind me of how the song is produced is, I know I'm just a wrinkle in your new life. Staying friends would smooth it out so nice. And this song is anything but smooth. It's kind of very wrinkly, metaphorically, of course, and very like stand out and very like, no, I'm here, I'm taking up space. I don't want your closure. Look at all this big mess I'm making.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And I think that that's put really nicely. And I think that sometimes a lot of people talk about, obviously, Taylor's departure from Big Machine Records and the idea of a broken machine, but I don't really think that that was the intention behind the experimental track. I think that Aaron kind of created this kind of mad track, and then Taylor has associated that kind of madness and feel. A bit like how she says with I Knew You Were Trouble, where she says the feeling is of the intensity and the madness of that relationship, and that's the sound that they created. And I think that that's very similar with this. It's like, no, I don't want your closure. You know, I'm going to make noise. I'm going to still be here. I'm going to be in your face. I'm not just going to slip away and, you know, so that you can sort out your life. I'm going to continue to stand here and make noise and be, you know, a kind of force of nature. So, yeah, I think that that's kind of reasoning, maybe, possibly. That's just obviously my opinion.
I also have quite an appreciation for closure because it was part of the songs that Aaron mentioned that he kept sending to Taylor with such hard, strange time signatures and compositions. And he kept like being surprised that she would like instantly send back lyrics to them with kind of like no problem. So it's really a testament to her musical abilities for sure.
Okay, so the next song that was kind of made for Evermore was Willow, and it was actually a celebration. It was made by Aaron as a celebration for Folklore's release in late July, and Aaron composed a piece of music that he named Westerly after Taylor's Rhode Island house location, and he sent it to Taylor, and soon after she sent him back Willow, which is just obviously another kind of amazing story of, a bit like with Cardigan, where he kind of sends Taylor these tracks and then she comes back with these kind of fully formed songs.
Taylor describes it as it being about intrigue, desire, and the complexity of wanting someone. And in that sense, it's very similar to Gold Rush, how we've described it previously. And she says, I think it sounds like casting a spell to make someone fall in love with you. And again, in her Apple interview that she did late last year, she also mentioned that she thought it was a good opener because it's kind of like very placing. And I do think that placing it as track one was a brilliant way to kind of suck you into the Evermore album.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think it is a good album opener. But how do you feel about the kind of fan theory or kind of discussion that they think that Willow was put at number one specifically because of the way that Folklore's kind of response was in its kind of streaming numbers? Because obviously the one was put as the opener for Folklore, and it was competing with Cardigan for the number one spot on the Billboard charts. And a lot of people say that they think that Willow was then put as track one so that it would get all of those initial streams upon people's kind of first listens, or if no one kind of, not that any, if people didn't say get through the whole album and they just listened to kind of the first track, it would mean that it would get tracks as streams as being a single and also as being the opener. So how do you feel about that? Do you think that that was the reason, or do you think that it was because Taylor felt like it was a perfect kind of opener into a different new kind of sound for Evermore?
I think it was a combination of both. Let's face it, Taylor is a very intelligent businesswoman. She knows what she's doing when she places songs, and she knows what she's doing with streaming. And I do think that it was very strategically placed as track one, but at the same time, as Taylor has described, it also works perfectly as a track one. So I kind of think there was a bit of an overlap between the two things coming together pretty well.
And also, obviously, with Willow, we got lots of different versions of Willow with kind of Lonely Witch, Dancing Witch. We also got like a log fire video. We got 90s Trend, and obviously a Grammys remix. So which one is in your, and obviously the album version. So which Willow is kind of the one that you really like, or are there Willows that you're not too sure about? And how do you feel about all of these remixes? Because this was kind of the first time where we just got a lot of versions. With Cardigan, obviously, we only really got the kind of Cabin in the Candlelight version, but with Willow we got a lot. We got like 7 different kind of versions of Willow. So how are you feeling about all of those?
Well, to be honest with you, the Grammy performance version, it is absolutely amazing. The drums Aaron and Jack, like how they played the guitars and stuff. Oh, it's just really, really good. I love it. I love how her voice is enhanced in it. And if someday we could get a full version of that, I would be so, so happy. What about you? What are your
I
opinions?
totally agree. I think I would not have. I think I would, if I could trade in all of the other versions of Willow for a Grammy remix version, then I 100% would. Because for me personally, I find that a lot of these remixes are obviously to help with streaming and stuff.
Of course.
But I just feel like the Folklore and Evermore are these kind of like acoustic-y albums, and I find that then having this kind of dance song, just for me personally, I don't listen. I have listened to them, during the album release, but I don't go back to them because I prefer the original so much more. But I think if we did have the Grammy one, I would definitely go back to it. So no, I think it is cool that we have lots of different versions, just in case anyone would like to, hear the song in a different vibe or different version. But for me, I think the ones that we have officially released, the original still kind of stands strong. But if we did have Grammy, I think that would probably be my favourite because, like you described, the guitars, the way that Taylor sings it, it would just be really cool because I would feel like the last chorus would really have a kind of like be quite impactful if it was the Grammy version. So yeah, no, I really do love that Grammy version as well, and I wish that we got a kind of longer segment of Willow for the Grammys, or had the whole song as the Grammy remix as such.
So basically what happened next is that songs kept being written, and Aaron described in his Rolling Stones interview that once about 7, 8 or 9 songs had been written, he realized that they were actually making another record, which is a very magical moment, I'm sure. But then, things picked up steam, and then all in all, they made around 17 songs. So around the halfway point is when Taylor seemed to have made Evermore and Tolerate It. And Tolerate It is a very interesting song. So it was a piano track that Aaron sent to Taylor, and it's another very strange time signature, according to him. And he remembers thinking, this song is intense. And he thought, maybe I shouldn't send it to her. She might not be into it. But as we've seen previously with Taylor, she received the song and she wrote this amazing, really, really heartbreaking lyric for it, and then sent it back to him. And this is really, really touching. But Aaron said that he actually cried when he heard it for the first time, because of how beautiful and how amazing these lyrics were. So Tolerate It was then eventually placed as a track 5, which in the Taylor Swift fandom, as we know, track 5s are very, very important, and they're placed very strategically usually. How do you feel about Tolerate It being a track 5?
Okay, so first I'll start with saying that I do really love Tolerate It, and I love Aaron and Taylor's relationship, and I think that it's really sweet that he kind of was so emotional about hearing this song, and I do really, really love Tolerate It. But track 5 for me always there because of the way obviously it's the saddest song, or normally it's the saddest song on the album, is placed as track 5, the kind of most intense one. And obviously we've had Cold as You, White Horse, Dear John, All Too Well, All You Had to Do Was Stay, Delicate, The Archer, My Tears Ricochet, and now Tolerate It. That's all of our track 5s. And personally, I feel like Champagne Problems, for me, if I was given this track list, and I know this is a very controversial opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me, but if I was given the track list, I would have put Champagne Problems probably as track 5. As much as I love Tolerate It, and I do think that it is a track 5, and I do think it has that track 5 sound, I would personally pick Champagne Problems. How are you feeling about the placement of track 5? Because I just think that the thing with track 5 is it's given so much weight and importance that, throughout the years, it's just for Taylor, it must be such a hard decision, because now it's such a, she knows that people are going to talk about it and be like, oh, I'm not sure about, but anyways, how do you feel?
Yeah, I agree with, I love Tolerate It, obviously, but I think the thing with Evermore is that it has quite a few very, very heartbreaking songs. So it was very difficult for her to choose which one was going to be the track 5. I will get to my theory about why Tolerate It in specific is the track 5, which I only have been illuminated on recently, which you'll find out why in a sec. But I kind of would change it as well. And I personally would change it for Happiness, because for me, that's the most heartbreaking song. But I think because, like I said, Evermore is full of these lyrical, pulling at your heartstrings songs, it could easily be changed around and it would have just as much weight. So just for you, Champagne Problems is the one that could be the most vulnerable or heartbreaking. For me, it's Happiness. But Yeah, it just must have been such a hard decision.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think you're right that with kind of folklore and Evermore's sound, naturally a lot of these songs have a lot of emotion and weight to them and are quite sad because obviously some of them are obviously imaginary stories that Taylor's written. So it must be harder to kind of pick the intense sad songs. So yeah, no, I think that nowadays for Taylor picking the track five because of things like All Too Well, Dear John, these huge kind of songs that are massive fan favourites and also are so emotional and has such depth to them. I think it must be really, really hard to try and pick one that emulates that kind of feeling and stands up against previous track fives.
So my theory on why Tolerate It was eventually placed as the track five instead of other songs has a lot to do with how personal it might have been to Taylor. So Taylor originally described it as having decided for it to be a track five because of how visual the lyrics were and how it conveyed a very specific kind of hurt. In my opinion, Tolerate It mirrors a lot of the feelings and lyrics that are expressed in All Too Well 10-minute version. So we have a description of this relationship with this big age gap. And one part of the relationship is very, very, excited and gives their all to the relationship. And the other part is just basically tolerating the relationship. And yeah, that age gap thing, I really find that it mirrors a lot of All Too Well's sentiment. You're so much older and wiser. How do you feel about that?
No, I do think that is interesting. And yeah, like you said, I think a lot of the songs, especially on Evermore, because obviously she was making Evermore while she was making Fearless. So I think a lot of those songs do then reflect some of the feelings in previous albums and have a more reflective kind of looking back on those kind of things. And I think that maybe she did start to explore feelings that were explored in other albums, or that because she was thinking about those songs and those kind of lyrics from either Red or Fearless or previous albums, that they were kind of then mimicked or used in the kind of Evermore songs. And I think that is a really good comparison between Tolerate It and All Too Well. Okay, so the next song that was written for Evermore was actually written after a night of playing and drinking at the Long Pond studio sessions, and Taylor stayed up late after the recording and wrote "'Tis the Damn Season." So how do we feel about "'Tis the Damn Season"?
Yeah, so "'Tis the Damn Season" is a song that I can't believe she was just was up all night and she had some wine to drink, and then she came up with this amazing song. I really particularly like it because of all of the holiday references. It's full of imagery, the song. I think you can really picture yourself driving up to the town and, it's just after holiday time, Christmas time, and someone who feels so much nostalgia for that town, but at the same time, kind of contempt for it as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think "'Tis the Damn Season" is another standout track. And recently on TikTok, someone talked about how the kind of intro instrumental to "'Tis the Damn Season" summed up the kind of whole Evermore album, and Taylor liked it. And I think that is very true. I think the sound of "'Tis the Damn Season" perfectly encapsulates the Evermore album.
And how do you feel about the connection between "'Tis the Damn Season" and Dorothea that has been kind of established?
I don't know. I'm not that versed on it, so if you could explain, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, of course. So basically, "'Tis the Damn Season" is supposed to be one perspective of the person who has gone off to LA and tried to become famous in some shape, way, or form, and then has returned back to her old town or their old town and has met up with this former flame that kind of their relationship broke up because that person left.
Yeah.
Whereas Dorothea is from the perspective, supposedly in the connection of these two songs, is from the perspective of someone who is thinking about this, of Dorothea, who supposedly would be the narrator of "'Tis the Damn Season," who left and went to chase their dreams and kind of left this town that, like I said, they kind of have some contempt towards or some bad feelings towards. It seems like Dorothea was a person who always wanted to run away from the town, and the narrator of Dorothea kind of liked being there.
Yeah, no, I do see those connections. I do see those connections definitely. But I think when I think about the connections in folklore between obviously the three kind of love triangle songs, I don't know, because where Taylor's never explicitly said that these two are connected.
Right.
Personally, I see them as quite separate.
Interesting.
So no, for me personally, I see them as quite separate songs. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion or not, But
No, I think that's very interesting. I mean, it's really been the fandom that has kind of pulled these songs together because of
yeah,
how the feeling and how it could be from these two perspectives. But if you kind of dive into the lyrics, I think there's just enough lyrics that differentiate them to be from two different people for sure. After that, Aaron and Bryce, his twin brother, also sent Taylor some songs that were initially ideated to be for The National, which is their band, for example, Coney Island. And then Marjorie was also composed using kind of a precursor track to Peace on Folklore. And then finally, we reached the last two songs that were written for the album, that were written really, really close to its release. The tracks for Happiness and also for Right Where You Left Me, I've been working on them since late 2019. So it's very interesting how Aaron does this a lot. He has like this folder of all of these songs and all of these produced works that he has. And then he kind of saves them up and then they find their moment sometimes. So it's really, really interesting how they became what eventually was Happiness and Right Where You Left Me.
Okay, so now we're going to discuss some of the overarching themes in Evermore. So Evermore obviously followed on from Folklore's themes of escapism and exploring fiction, stories that are kind of told from a first-person perspective, that also mix with lives of created characters and true stories and facts. So this idea, again, of folklore, of these stories that kind of pass down, and you don't really know which elements are true and which elements are kind of fiction. So Taylor said to Apple that folklore's main kind of tropes were conflict resolution and trying to figure out how to get through something, whereas with Evermore it actually deals with endings, so like the pain and kind of phases of closure.
I love how she described Evermore as being all of these types of closures, of all of these endings, because I always felt like when I listened to Folklore, though it sounds kind of happier, that Folklore was laced with much more grief and loss and dealing with it, whereas Evermore is coming to terms with that loss. And also I do find that it's laced with kind of like a newfound hope and more of a idealistic view to it on the whole. How do you feel about that?
I totally agree. I feel like Folklore is kind of an in the moment feeling of like dealing with it once it's ended, and like kind of sitting in that moment with it. Whereas Evermore is so much more reflective and looking back on the closure of it and looking back on it, reflecting on it, turning around and continuing on. And I think that's quite reflective of what Taylor said again, to pull back to that about the idea of going back into the woods. Rather than just jumping and going, she turned back, looked at it all, finished it off, added all the endings that were needed, and then turned around and continued on. And I think that that's kind of how Evermore is it is a sort of finishing the ending, whereas Folklore kind of discussed how it was an in the moment kind of thing. That's how I find with a lot of the Folklore kind of songs, whereas Evermore is like the endings, champagne problems, closure. I think there's It's Time to Go, Right Where You Left Me, kind of all the endings. So I think that, yeah, Taylor described it perfectly, and that is another perfect way of showing how these albums are sisters, not necessarily following on from each other. They're similar, but they're totally different from each other. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, one of the themes is kind of loss and pain of loss, and one of the songs that this is so clear in is It's Time to Go, and obviously the loss of her masters that is discussed throughout Folklore, comes to conclusion in Evermore with It's Time to Go. And personally, I think that this is the most perfect ending for the album. I think with like the two deluxe songs, like Right Where You Left Me, the kind of the ending of something but not being able to get over it, but then having It's Time to Go, of ending with something and realizing, no, that is the past, but I'm going to turn around and continue and walk on into the future, into the re-recording era. And yeah, how do you feel about that? I really, really love this as a kind of a closing track.
I completely agree. I do also love it as a closing track for the deluxe edition. So, and like you said, Right Where You Left Me is not so much to do with obviously like an ending, more of like being stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
And then It's Time to Go is like this amazing ending, and this at the same time opening up, like you said, to the re-recording era. I think it was brilliantly placed. And I just wanted to also highlight kind of like a parallel that runs between the two songs on the deluxe version. So we have Right Where You Left Me, where she kind of says that, have you ever heard about the girl that got frozen? Time went on for everyone. except for her. And then we have It's Time to Go, where she says, he's got my past frozen behind glass, but I've got me. And I thought that was such an amazing way to contrast the two songs, and then to just like say, okay, here we are, I've got me, we're moving on, here's some re-recordings. Amazing.
Yeah, I think it was the perfect end to the kind of Folklore Evermore era, and the perfect start to the kind of re-recorded era as such.
Another one of the most important themes that run both throughout Folklore and Evermore is the theme of nature. So, of course, we have all of these references to water, different trees, the forest, but also in general, Folklore seems to have more of this spring-summer feel to it. And as Taylor described, she decided to make Evermore have more of a fall or wintry feel to it. A Yuletide feel to them. They have, like, both lyric and production-wise, they have this incorporation of sleigh bells or these very specific lines in different songs, like the holidays linger like bad perfume, deck the halls that we once walked through, which really tie all the songs together, making it kind of like a Christmas album, but not really a Christmas album.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sad Christmas album, isn't it? It's like, it encapsulates the feeling of the season of Christmas and winter, rather than the feeling of Christmas, if you know what I mean. The feeling of like, presents and Christmas trees, stuff like that, but it encapsulates the physical feeling of the season changing and getting colder. And I think that's what's so perfect about this album, is that it is perfect for this season, even though necessarily it doesn't mention stuff that is specific to Christmas, if you know what I mean. I think that it, as a sound and as an emotion and as a feeling, it encapsulates the feeling of winter as a season. And I think that that's what's so perfect about this album. Whereas Folklore is, very spring-summer, whereas Evermore kind of is darker, the nights are getting colder, the days are shorter, those kind of things. I think that it is, and I think what's really cool now is that we get to experience it this year, because obviously we got it like mid-December, so we only really got to experience it as being in winter for like a month or so, whereas now we got to properly, this year in 2021, experience it as fall into autumn and into winter. And I think that that's made me appreciate the songs and the sound of the songs even more, because you're hearing it as the seasons are changing and as it's getting colder and darker.
For sure. Aaron kind of described it as having a wintry nostalgia to much of the music. Like I said, incorporating those sleigh bells, which you can hear on tracks like Ivy, for example, and Dorothea. And it's really, really interesting how it kind of ties it all together in such a beautiful way. And whenever I do think of Evermore, I think of, like, I don't know, snow falling and a very wintry scene, but a very nostalgic one. Speaking of nature, I think we should take a pause to speak about the nature song. The whole song is a big metaphor using Ivy, which is the song Ivy, of course. How do you feel about this song?
I really do like Ivy. Again, it's kind of a standout track for me, with kind of Gold Rush and Champagne Problems. I just really, really love Ivy, and kind of love the change up in the kind of bridge as such. I think it's perfect. How do you feel about this song?
Yes, Ivy is a lovely song. It has so much metaphor of nature being used with it. Of course, ivy growing on the stone house is this, how she thinks of these things, I don't even know. But yeah, it's this amazing visual of someone kind of creeping in, even though you don't want them and you're trying to stop it, but they're taking hold. And then throughout the song, we have like spring breaks loose, a fire is blazing. She really went with the nature theme here and made an amazing song out of it. Another interesting lyric change or shift in Ivy is the differences that exist between the explicit version and the clean version. When Taylor writes an explicit song, she also produces a clean one to go on the clean version of the album. In this case, they were changed. And I think in the bridge, the words that she replaces "goddamn" with are absolutely amazing. So I'll read them out. So she says, "It's a fire, it's a violent blaze in the dark, and you started it. It's a war, it's the fiercest fight of my life, and you started it." I love them.
Oh my gosh. I've never listened to the clean version because I just haven't ever thought to, but I absolutely love those lyric changes. That is so cool. That is so, so cool.
This change gives the bridge just like these two little words, make it so much more, I don't know, magical in my opinion. I really love it.
Yes, I absolutely love those clean version lyrics. I think they just add so much more kind of depth and intensity, even just by changing a couple of words. to the like blazing fire idea. I think it's so cool that we've got the kind of explicit version and the clean version of Ivy, and I absolutely love those lyrics. And I think that it's a kind of perfect extension on the original version, on the explicit version of Ivy.
Another theme that runs through Evermore and that also runs through folklore is references to novels and literature in general. So we have quite a few on Evermore. To go through them, we have this, more than a specific reference, is just a general reference to Evermore being announced on the 10th of December, which is Emily Dickinson's birthday, and she also employs forevermore in one of her poems. That's quite an interesting thing that I thought I could mention here. Next, we have Compassion, which is a poem by Miller Williams, in which he mentions an Ivy lyric where the spirit meets the bones, which I think is an amazing way to say graveyard. And then we have a very interesting literature reference, which is The Great Gatsby. So we know that Taylor absolutely loves Fitzgerald and loves to mention things to do with the Gatsby and other novels of his. Since the 1989 era, really, we had references in Reputation, Feeling So Gatsby for that whole year, and then we have a couple in Happiness as well. So firstly, we have the lyric, I hope she'll be a beautiful fool, which is what Daisy in the book says about her daughter. And then we also have this reference to the green light, which is what Gatsby strives towards throughout the whole book. And in this case, in Happiness, it's the green light of forgiveness. And I think they're just such really, really cool references, which don't really allude to how they were used in Gatsby originally, but really serve as amazing images. Then in Long Story Short, we have a reference to Alice in Wonderland, which again, she's been referencing since 1989. And then, of course, we come to Tolerate It, which was loosely inspired by Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And then finally, we have a reference to The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. So it just goes to show how well-read Taylor is and how she can kind of use all of these literary references that are very classical literary references and tie them into her work, which gives the work a lot more depth to it, to be honest.
Okay, so the next kind of theme of Evermore is marriage, and most specifically the breakdown of them. So obviously in this kind of theme we have Champagne Problems, Happiness, and Coney Island. So Champagne Problems is one of my favourites off of Evermore. I absolutely love this song, like I described earlier. I feel like it has a very kind of track 5-y feel, and I just love the imagery of the kind of the rich tapestry and the kind of a glass ball. I just absolutely love those kind of visuals, and I think, like you said earlier, with the references to kind of literature, is of how well read Taylor is, and how because she is so well read, how amazing she is at describing stuff so poetically, but in such a simple way, but from such simple kind of descriptions of stuff, it being so visual. And I think Champagne Problems for me is such a visual song. Every time I listen, I just feel like I'm kind of can just see that story so visually, with the night train, the wallet, and the ring. I just think it's perfect and absolutely amazing song, and just so well written, and is another highlight, is a standout in terms of Taylor's songwriting, songs that highlight her songwriting credibility and amazingness, but just to highlight in terms of her discography in general.
For sure, it is a really beautiful story, very sad story, and it explores so many things within it. Obviously, a rejected marriage proposal, but also like mental health and these childhood sweethearts that something wasn't clicking for them, and it's very heartbreaking. And I know this has been going around quite a lot recently, but have you seen about people commenting how someone, when she's describing them being on their, well, usually it would be on your knee, get down on one knee to propose, but in the lyric she changes it on your knees,
like begging. The kind of absolutely begging to, like, please marry me. Like, I think it is just, that's what I mean, just such a simple word like that just adds so much more like visual elements to the song. And that's what I mean, the song is, for me personally, is so visual, because of the way that Taylor describes it. And just that simple change of knee to knees, it's just like adds this kind of intensity, further intensity to the song, and pleading. I just absolutely, I could talk all day. I could talk for like 2 hours about this song. So I won't bore you, but yeah, no, I absolutely love Champagne Problems.
As it is a favourite of yours, I'm sure you were very excited that we recently got this snippet of Taylor singing it with Aaron playing piano.
Yes.
It was a very beautiful snippet.
Yeah, and I think that snippet just made me want to hear these Evermore songs in some sort of live format, whether it be like a Long Pondy session or actually live, because it was just so gorgeous, and especially the stairs and just in Taylor's house and her with the wedding dress from I Bet You Think About Me. It was just like that couldn't have been a more perfect outfit to sing that song in. I think it was so cool.
Yeah, the Runaway Bride.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely perfect. So cool. And yeah, no, that was definitely a really cool moment to see that. Okay, so the next song that discusses marriage is Happiness, and I know you have quite a lot to say about Happiness, because I feel like that is probably one of your favourites on Evermore.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about Happiness? What's your opinions on it?
Oh, I adore Happiness. I love how we follow the relationship and how the narrator is looking from like a pulled back perspective and saying, you know, I can see it for what it is, but now I'm right in the middle of all this and all of these years that we spent together. How do I pack that all up into a box and drive away? How can I do that? And at the same time, apart from this relationship breaking down, is this person looking for who she's going to be or who they're going to be, who is the new me. And I think it's just all beautifully written. The bridge is absolutely amazing, and that final part of her describing how you know the relationship didn't break down because there was a horrible detonant to it or there was a big problem. It was just like they grew apart and they kind of broke up. And the ending where she says, all you want is the green light of forgiveness. I haven't met the new me yet, but I think she can give you that. And that is really, for me, one of the biggest running themes on Evermore, that closure, that being able to move on from something and seeing hope in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful description of Happiness, and yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think that, yeah, this definitely fits in with the idea of closure and moving on from stuff and feeling the maturity. I think Evermore has a lot more maturity than Folklore, especially the stories that are told. Within Folklore, obviously you have stories of like Betty and Augustine and stuff, and James, and obviously very immature. I'm not saying that Taylor is immature or that the songwriter.
No, but told from a perspective of a teenager.
Yeah, the perspectives on Folklore are more immature perspectives, especially those 3 songs specifically, just picking those out. Whereas Happiness and Champagne Problems and other songs on Evermore have such more maturity, and the maturity to look back and realise, okay, I think I'll be able to move on from this, and I think I'll be a better person, or, you know, be just more mature. I think that Happiness is a perfect example of that. And I think that's what Evermore has. Evermore, even though it was released later, feels like the older sister to Folklore, even though Folklore was first. Weirdly, the themes on Evermore, like I said, are just more mature in terms of the characters that Taylor sings about, seem to have more depth and understanding. Like in Happiness, I think that song is so. As the song progresses, the narrator becomes more mature and looks back on the situation with more depth.
It's funny because, in a way, it's funny how some of Folklore kind of reminds me Teenage Love, that was kind of described in Fearless, which is the first re-recording we got. And then this Evermore, and the stories told in Evermore, are much more looking back at things and reminiscing over breakdowns, which is something we get on Red. So it's very interesting how those parallels kind of sorted themselves out. Last thing I want to say about Happiness is that if I was to sum up Evermore in one lyric, I would sum it up in, there is a glorious sunrise, dappled with the flickers of light from the dress I wore at midnight. Amazing.
Yes, it is. That is really, really, again, so visual. Okay, so another one of the songs in this marriage theme is Coney Island. And how do you feel about Coney Island? I feel like sometimes it's a song that's forgotten about on Evermore, or not necessarily forgotten about, but often overlooked. And it seems like Taylor really, really loved that she could sing with the National, and she even said, didn't she, that she specifically put the Happy Birthday lyric in there so that one of her kind of musical idols could sing Happy Birthday to her. So yeah, what's your opinion on Coney Island?
the marriage trilogy, as we've kind of put it, is we have champagne problems where someone is rejecting a marriage proposal, happiness where it's like a breakup, and Coney Island where there's not necessarily a breakup but just a reflection over time of these two people that have been together for such a long time. And we're sitting in Coney Island, and as Taylor described it, is this usually this bright and an electric place, but now it's kind of, there's mist and it's all died down and there's cold. We're in the cold. It gets colder and colder. So I love Coney Island. At first I couldn't even listen to it because it is so heartbreaking if you sit down and really listen. But one thing I absolutely adore is the double perspective.
Okay, so another one of the themes is geography, and two perfect examples of geographical locations being mentioned within Evermore songs is Dorothea with Tupelo and Coney Island. Okay, so another one of the themes is obviously with this album we got a lot more personal kind of songs with Long Story Short and Marjorie. And Long Story Short obviously kind of is a very reflective song, probably looking back on the period between the 1989 and Reputation era. And I think that she perfectly, it's almost like looking back on that version of herself and saying like, you know, you'll get past this, you'll survive it. Just, you know, those people, those enemies of yours, they'll defeat themselves. It'll be fine. You know, you'll move on from it. And obviously Marjorie, which discusses Taylor's grandma.
Yeah, as we near the second half to the end of the album, I definitely think Taylor added some more personal songs. So like you said, we have Long Story Short, which is kind of like the TLDR of Reputation, if you ask me. It's like, yes. Here's it all summarized, and it's such a nice song, the way that she says, you know, past me, don't get caught up in all of this, everything's going to be okay. And then of course Marjorie, which is a beautiful song and about Taylor's grandmother, and to have Taylor's grandmother's old opera singing featured in the song is such a beautiful detail.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it was a really lovely thing for them to sing on a song together.
It definitely shows, always put so many personal details into her albums. If we think back to 1989, you know, and in Evermore she does the same with finding these old opera songs and placing them in, and she really does put her heart and soul into all of these albums so much, and Evermore is no exception. Moving on to the collaborators that Taylor worked with on Evermore, it is a very collaborative album, much more than Folklore in a sense, because they opened up the family, the Folklorian family, and new people got involved. But of course, we have Aaron and Jack being the main producers. As we discussed, Aaron being on every track except for Gold Rush. So these two were very, very important in the sound of both Folklore and, of course, Evermore. Then we have Justin Vernon, who is Bon Iver, of course, and he really got so much more involved in this album, and Taylor was very excited for him to be on Folklore at all, so I can only but imagine how overwhelmed and overjoyed she must have been when he was even more involved in Evermore. So apart from singing on Evermore, the song, of course, he also plays drums on Cowboy Like Me and Closure, he plays guitar and banjo, and even sings on Ivy, and he sings on Marjorie, and of course, Evermore. Moreover, he was the one who processed Taylor's vocals through the Messina, which is just like this vocal processor, for Closure. So he was very, very much involved in this record. And I think now we can briefly speak about the Taylor and Bon Iver collaboration on this record, which is, of course, the title track, Evermore. How do you feel about Evermore? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really do love the song Evermore. I just think it's, and initially was a really good closure before, obviously, her closure is in the closing track of the album, before obviously we got Right Where You Left Me and It's Time to Go. And I really do like the kind of shift and change when Justin comes in. I think that kind of perfectly encapsulates the kind of feeling of Evermore. And I really do like the song Evermore. I think it's a really kind of gorgeous song. And it's really nice that we got a song that was the title of the album, because obviously with Folklore there was not a song called Folklore or kind of that specifically said the word, whereas ironically in Evermore one of the songs says Folklore. So yeah, no, I really liked that again, because I quite like a song, a title track. I just think it's quite cool. So yeah, no, I really do like Evermore. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I love Evermore. It tells like going through it. You know, they're in the wildest winter, and to be honest, last year was the wildest winter, I think, for many people. So yeah, it's about like this struggle, and again, a lot of imagery of nature, and then finally after this tumultuous bridge, which is amazing, the shift, she finally gets to the cabin, which is amazing. It's something to strive for, just like arriving and being warm and finally getting there. So another returning collaborator is William Bowery, or as we know now, it's Joe. So he actually played the piano for Evermore, which is amazing. And he wrote 2 other songs with Taylor. So he wrote Evermore, Coney Island, and Champagne Problems in total, which are 3 heartbreaking songs, to be honest with you, but they're so beautifully written.
I think what's interesting about a lot of the songs that Joe writes about is that they have like a double perspective. So like with Exile, Coney Island, Evermore.
Yes.
It's interesting how a lot of them have a kind of male perspective, or Betty even from Folklore is obviously from a male perspective. And Champagne Problems again has a kind of, even though it's obviously sung from a single narrator, has a kind of dual perspective of the idea of the kind of the other person in a relationship wanting to get married and obviously the other one not, and stuff like that. So I think what's quite interesting about a lot of the Joe co-writes is that they do have this dual kind of perspective and element to them.
That's such an interesting observation, yeah. And also, of course, from what we can tell is that Joe is a really, really good piano player, because these piano tracks are just amazing.
Yeah, no, and then also for someone that isn't, their profession isn't songwriting, it's incredible, the songs that he's written. I think that he deserves a lot more respect for his songwriting abilities, because clearly he is very, very good at it.
The collaborative effort between them is absolutely amazing to see, and really, really sweet. Other collaborators that Taylor worked with were The National on Coney Island, and then Haim with Nobody No Crime, which is a song that we haven't really got to yet. So Nobody No Crime is, of course, fictional, but it explores true crime and a trope that is very much established in country music, which is kind of killing off a husband.
Yes.
How do you feel about Nobody No Crime? I know you quite like it.
I absolutely love it. I think it perfectly, the sound of that song sounds like a kind of murder mystery. Like, I just think Taylor did such an incredible job with it, and I think that it's just like perfect. The sound, the way she sings, and the way that the story develops. I remember I would love to go back and have never heard that song again and listen to it again when it's like, and like she thinks it's me, but she can't prove it. I just love it. The change. Yeah. I think this song is so cool, and I love that she brought Haim on board, because obviously the mention of Esty. But it's a shame that they didn't kind of get, obviously their more backing vocal, which is a shame, because I would have really loved a proper kind of collab. But obviously we got Gasoline Remix, which is more of a proper collab. So in the end, we did kind of get a proper Haim Taylor collab. But I think they were perfect on this track, and their vocals enhanced it. And I swear she was with me kind of thing. I just really, really love this song. I think it's one of my favourites, and definitely a kind of standout. And again, it's so visual because of the way that Taylor sings, and the sound just feels like that kind of murder mystery, kind of Crazy Ex, absolutely perfect.
Finally, we must also mention Marcus Mumford, who appears as backing vocals in Cowboy Like Me.
Again, like I said with Haim, what I find interesting is that Haim were kind of backing vocal on Nobody No Crime, whereas Marcus Mumford is backing vocal, and you can hear him just as clearly as you can Haim, but he wasn't deemed as a feature, which I think is quite interesting, and that's obviously something that is discussed a lot about when something is deemed a feature, when something is deemed backing vocals. Like obviously with Moran Morris on You All Over Me, I would deem her the same as Marcus Mumford as backing vocal, but obviously it's deemed as a feature. So it's a shame that Marcus wasn't given the feature kind of stamp on the song. But in terms of whether, that's a whole different kind of discussion, but Cowboy Like Me itself, I absolutely love. This is my favourite song on Evermore. I just think the way that the song is, it's just the description is just gorgeous. The metaphors, the themes, and also even before I heard the song, the fact that she said it was like said cowboy, it just kind of reminded me of Closest to a Cowboy, which is an unreleased Taylor song.
Throwback.
Back from kind of the debut era, and I was like, oh my gosh, Cowboy! I love kind of country Taylor. I'm a big country music fan, so before I'd even heard it, I was like, that's my favourite. Before I'd even actually heard it. And then I heard it and was like, oh no, I love this song. And Cowboy Like Me, I just think is absolutely amazing. The lyrics, the idea of these 2 con artists, I just love it. I absolutely love it. How do you feel about Cowboy Like Me?
Yeah, so firstly, I have to agree that Marcus Mumford really, his vocals and the backing vocals that he provides really do enhance the track. so much. And apart from that, again, agree, the track itself, the story of the two con artists and how they had such different priorities, but they kind of like found each other and priorities change, and oh, it's just so good. The whole metaphor that's used, I love how it starts with and the tennis court. It's kind of like a continuation to a story, like she's telling this story and there was more that come before it.
Yeah.
And it's like you're kind of like creeping into her at a bar telling this story about how she met the love of her life, you know what I mean?
Yes,
and
yes.
and all the people that she had to con to get to him, really. And of course must mention the lyric, now you hang from my lips like the gardens of Babylon, with your boots beneath my bed, forever is the sweetest con. That lyric.
It's just, that's what I mean, it's so visual. This is what I'm saying about Evermore, is that, and Folklore is the same, Folklore is just as visual, but Evermore just is so visual and so gorgeous, and these lyrics are so, like,
They're
there's so much
insane.
depth to them, but probably for Taylor, they're just so simple and they just probably roll off the tongue, but
Wow.
they are, because she's such an amazing songwriter, but they're just so much depth, and yeah, forever is the sweetest con. And I think what's really sweet is Taylor wrote Marcus Mumford a kind of little note that said "Forever is the sweetest con" with her signature and some stars, I think, and he's kind of
Eyes
framed
full of
it.
stars, I think, as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, and he's like framed it, and it's like I would kill to have that, because I love Cowboy Like Me. Like, imagine having her kind of. It's a bit like with the signed red CDs. Imagine having Taylor's like
The
handwritten
lyric.
lyrics, and insane. But no, Cowboy Like Me is just a perfect song, and is my favorite from Evermore, and one of my favourites of her entire discography. Like I said, a bit like Champagne Problems, I could probably have a whole 2-hour episode just discussing Cowboy Like Me, and it's incredible kind of description. Okay, so now we're going to discuss some of the records and achievements of Evermore. So what's quite interesting, and it is a kind of callback to how Evermore is so much more experimental and has so many different sounds, is that Willow was kind of given to US adult contemporary and pop stations during like December 4th and 15th, whereas then Nobody No Crime was given to country radio in January 2021, the 11th of Jan, and then Coney Island was then given to adult alternative radio on about the 18th of Jan 2021. And I think that just the fact that so many songs were given to so many different kind of radio stations just shows the broadness of Evermore's sound and the experimentation of Evermore. And I think that just even something like simple like that just shows how Evermore kind of fits in so many different kind of categories. And very similar to Folklore. Folklore had the same thing with Cardigan going pop, Betty going country, and Exile going to alternative. So upon Evermore's release, it was met with widespread critical acclaim. On Metric, it has an 85, which is based on 29 reviews, and this indicates kind of a universal acclaim. And at the end of the year in 2020, it was also put on many notable NGA lists, despite being released obviously really late into 2020. So on US Today, it was ranked as #1 of the best albums of 2020. On Variety, it was also put as #1 on the best albums of 2020, and Rolling Stone ranked it as #5 on the best 20 albums of 2020. And then obviously in terms of charting, on Billboard 200 chart, it went #1 and topped it for 4 weeks, even during Christmas, which has obviously meant that it was competing against Christmas albums, which normally skyrocket up the charts during the kind of Christmas and festive season. Willow also went #1 on the Billboard 100 chart. Also, what's quite interesting is, again, that even though it was released during the last 2 weeks of 2020, Evermore became one of the top 10 best-selling albums of 2020, which is absolutely insane that within such a short period of time it could kind of hit and break all these records. Also, it broke a Guinness World Book of Records for the shortest gap between two charting albums by a woman on the Billboard 200, obviously between Folklore and Evermore. Taylor has since beaten this record with Fearless, which Taylor's version, which is just absolutely amazing that she's continuing to break records that she only broke a couple of months before. In June, it also scored its 4th week upon the Billboard 200 with its vinyl release, and now again Taylor has surpassed that record with Red, Taylor's version. But it's interesting how recently lots of people have said that Taylor, in terms of vinyl sales, is kind of the biggest at the moment. She's just breaking all sorts of records and smashing all sorts of numbers with massive vinyl sales. So I was really glad that Evermore, upon its final release, got another week of kind of attention, because like we mentioned earlier, sometimes I think because of Evermore's release and then the release of Fearless, it meant that Evermore never really got its kind of moment, with Folklore then going to the Grammys and, you know, being Album of the Year. So I'm really glad that upon its final release, it did so well and broke all these records, and it just shows that there is a real love for Evermore. Okay, and also Evermore has won an American Music Award for Favourite Pop Rock Album, and also won an ARIA Award when Taylor won for Best International Artist. And obviously recently as well, Taylor has been nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys with Evermore, which I'm so glad about, that Evermore has been given the recognition that it definitely deserves.
So am I. I'm really pleased that it's got a nomination. I'm very, very happy because it does deserve that recognition. It is one of the most amazing albums that have been released in the last, year and a half or whatever. And I do think that it deserved it, just as deserving as Folklore.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think as well, I wish that it had maybe been nominated in other categories for like record or song or kind of pop vocal, because I personally, as much as I would love Evermore to win Album of the Year, and its chances are not zero at all, like it definitely has the chance of winning Album of the Year. I think that it is unlikely because of obviously Taylor only winning for Folklore last year.
Right.
So I would have loved for it to have been in other categories where it would have probably definitely won, because I think in terms of the albums that are nominated, Evermore, is definitely up there in terms of songwriting, musicality, like it's just incredible. But I just think, unfortunately, because of last year, I would be amazed, and I'm hopeful. I would love her to win for it, and I definitely want her to. But I would just be amazed that the Grammys would give her a fourth Album of the Year nomination, especially only being a year after the previous one. A Grammy win, a year after the previous one. Like, I was amazed that Folklore won again, totally deserved, and so glad about. But I wish that Evermore just had a couple more kind of nominations sprinkling across other different categories, so that it was more likely to pick up more. But I'm glad that it's got a nomination anyway. And like we have mentioned in previous episodes, Grammys are not everything. Grammys do not determine how amazing an album is or its kind of importance or impact. Whether it does or doesn't, Evermore is still an incredible album, and still, as we have talked about for the last hour or so, it's just a gorgeously written and produced album. So whether it does or doesn't win.
Right, I agree. Its chances are slim, but it is an episode that we could perhaps do as the Grammys near. We can discuss, how its chances look, and there are certain things that could go in its favour, certain groups of blocks of voters within the Grammy committee that tend to prefer more country songs, and Evermore is the only kind of country-leaning song that is in that nomination pack. So, you never know, as you said. I love to be hopeful, but just the nomination itself, I think, is enough for me, just for Evermore to be recognised as what it is, just a marvellous album. With that, we have reached the end of the Evermore retrospective. It has been amazing to look back at this whole album, its chronology, how it all came about, how it was written, its beautiful lyrics, its beautiful production, and how well it did. It's just such an amazing album that I think we're both very thankful for. So to conclude, I wanted to ask you, Cameron, what are your top songs from Evermore? If you could choose just a few that are on replay, what's your faves?
I definitely think Champagne Problem, Cowboy Like Me first, definitely. Cowboy Like Me, Champagne Problems, Gold Rush, Ivy, and probably Right Where You Left Me. I really love the feeling on Right Where You Left Me of this kind of slow pan. And again, I just think that all of the albums are so incredibly visual, and those songs for me are just so visual when I listen to them, and those are definitely my standouts as my favourites of the album. What are yours?
Put Happiness as the first. It's my favourite on the album. Love Evermore. Cowboy Like Me, as you mentioned, Gold Rush, as you mentioned, Right Where You Left Me, as you mentioned, and then also Coney Island. But as you said, these are my top favourites, but the whole album itself is such an amazing and magical body of work. With that, we have reached the end of this long episode. If you did enjoy it, make sure to follow us over on Instagram, which is @SwiftlySpokenPodcast, where we'll be giving episode extras. If you're over on YouTube, we would like to thank you for all of the views and the likes and the love and the comments that you've been giving us recently. Make sure you subscribe if you want to keep up to date with us. Give us your opinions about Evermore and your favourites on the album. Finally, we have a couple of really exciting episodes coming up this month, so stay tuned for them. Next week will be our Christmas special, and then after that we have the Swiftly Spoken Awards coming up. So keep an eye on our Instagram and on our YouTube, where we'll be putting up the polls for the votes. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.